Hi guys. Gosh, I feel like I've just been doing lives or teaching in the evening. It's crazy how much my work life has changed. But thanks for joining us today. I know so many of you have been looking forward to today's chat, which is all about mental health with my sister and psychiatrist Devika Patel. I actually heard her speak on a live event, a virtual event about self-care and mental health. And some of the things that she said, even though we talk about this kind of stuff within our family at home, some of the stuff that she said really resonated with me, and I felt like I really had to share it, or she should be given a platform to share it. So I thought I'd bring her on today, and what a better month to do it than South Asian Heritage Month. So I had my dad on last week to talk about his journey from Africa, you know, celebrating how we got here, talking about the racism, which wasn't very nice to hear about actually. So even though there's lots to celebrate within our culture, there is also lots of taboo subjects, and you know, mental health is definitely one of them. So I'm going to bring Devika on. So we've had lots of questions from you guys to answer today. So we've put a kind of format together, and we'll be getting through them. And if you have any questions, pop them in the comments. I'm not turning the comments off today, just because I feel like it helps with the flow. Hi Devika.
Hi, you okay?
Yeah, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
This is weird. We've never done this before.
Well, we do a lot of FaceTiming, so we'll just pretend it's the same as that.
Yeah, okay. So I think we'll get right into it, because I don't think 1 hour is enough to kind of, you know, cover this subject, because it's absolutely a massive subject. So you're a psychiatrist. Can you tell us a little bit why you picked mental health, and maybe what the term means as well?
So I graduated, so I did my medicine degree and I graduated in 2010, and then I did 2 years of rotating jobs every 4 months, and that's when I decided that I wanted to specialize in mental health, so start my training as a psychiatrist. So I'm 3 years into that training right now, and I've got 3 years left, and at the end of that I'll be a consultant psychiatrist. So a lot of people get a bit confused between kind of what a psychiatrist, if they're real doctors. So we're doctors who have just chosen to specialize in mental health, a bit like a cardiologist is a doctor that specializes in heart health. So that's a little bit about who I am and how I got here.
So mental health, I know it's such a big thing now that we kind of talk about more. We're told to be more aware about our mental health, how we do our day-to-day living, how work impacts us, how relationships impact us. But sometimes actually when you're trying to implement it and really understand what it means, it's quite a broad subject from what I've understood. Like I can say that I was definitely affected with I was aware that my mental health was affected during lockdown because of the way we were all just couldn't see family, work, etc. But then, you know, it's quite a broad subject. So can you go into what it actually means as an umbrella term, and, you know?
Yeah. So the word mental health is used a lot, and I think that doesn't kind of capture every single part of mental health. So rather than mental health just meaning an illness, we need to think of it as a continuum, and at every stage in your life you'll be somewhere on this continuum. So it could be at one extreme where it's a severe mental illness like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, or you could be on the other side where you might be having some issues with low mood, and that could just be you're having a day with low mood, or you're having some sleepless nights, or you're having a bout of anxiety. So I think at one end of the spectrum, you've got your day-to-day mental well-being. And then if that isn't, you haven't kind of been able to look after it, or there's lots of stress in your life, there's lots of triggers, or there's family history, then there's the potential for you to develop a diagnosable mental illness. And that could be something more common like anxiety or depression or OCD, or it could be something more severe that like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, which are conditions which once you get, there is a tendency that you keep getting relapses of them throughout your life, rather than just having kind of one bout of it, and they might need hospitalization, specialist care, medication, a lot of intensive support.
Okay, so we're going to go on to like the more, you know, the other side of the spectrum. Let's start on kind of how maybe all of us may be affected with, you know, mental health at some point in our life. But bringing it back to the South Asian community, because that's why we're speaking about it right now, because it's such a big taboo subject within our culture. Why do you think that is?
So I think, well, one of the questions that we had when I posted out, if there's any questions, was what's the history on why mental health is a taboo? And I thought that was phrased really well, because I think we've got so used to talking about South Asian culture seeing mental health as a taboo, but what we're not doing is kind of looking back at the history. And if we go back to ancient Hindu scriptures and how our religion and our culture began, and that's for Hinduism, Sikhism, Jainism, Buddhism, everything that's coming from kind of Southeast Asia, then we know that mental health and physical health was also always considered as one, and there was lots of practices in put in place, for example, yoga, mindfulness, kind of healthy eating, daily exercise, meditation, all of those things were put in place for a healthy mind and a body. So it was part of the way of life. Now, as years have gone on, as generations have gone on, because of moving to different parts of the world and modernization, Western culture having influences, we've lost all those basic principles which are there to keep us healthy. I think the Western world very much looks at curative things rather than preventative. So we've totally lost that. So generally we're only getting help when we're in kind of crisis, for example, if we've got a diagnosable condition, rather than taking a step back. But what we need to do is go back to those basics and start practicing those. And then you'll realize that actually within South Asian culture, mental health was always talked about, and it was talked about in a preventable way. But because what we can't do is kind of just use that as an explanation or excuse, but we need to start having those active conversations right now. I think one thing that affects our cultures is that we were always told that elders know best, or listen to your elders. Whereas I think, Jenny, in our family, I don't know if it was intentional or not, we've kind of always rebelled that and said, well, why do we do this? And why is that way? And why don't we talk about that? And what's that helped is for us to engage in a conversation and challenge some of those ideas that, oh, you don't talk about mental health, or that didn't happen, or that person's not depressed, they're just like a little bit sad, or not having those open conversations. So if we start having those conversations and looking into our history, then we'll actually realize mental health isn't a taboo within our culture, and everything that the Western world is now practicing and making their own, like yoga and mindfulness, that was part of our being forever. So we need to start educating ourselves on our own culture and practice it day in, day out, and that can just help us with prevention.
Exactly.
But I'll also start with actual going on as well.
I was going to say with like yoga, how it's been, you know, now it's like there's all cultural appropriation going on, and loads of people around the world think that it's all about building a good physique and toning up and becoming really flexible. But actually that is one of the byproducts of the practice. The practice was to gain discipline and gain balance within your mind. And I feel like all of that's got lost. But it's good that there's apps now that can, you know, enable us to do that, so that we can practice being more mindful within those practices and bringing it back to hopefully doing it and then teaching our children and passing that culture back on, right?
Yeah, definitely. But we've got to change the narrative, because it's embarrassing when I go to a yoga class and I'm the only Indian person there, and there isn't an Indian person teaching an ancient Indian art and a form of science and well-being. So it's about this generation changing that narrative and educating ourselves on what our culture was all about. And it was all about healthy mind and healthy body, and it's all one. It was never seen as separate entities.
Slightly off topic, I feel like because we came from a foreign country, and things from people that lived here natively might have looked and thought, oh, you know, those people that come from there don't know how to live, don't know how to, like, you know, live with class and etc. And I feel like maybe that's why, you know, the practices of yoga, meditation kind of got ditched by the South Asian community. So maybe now it's time to join back in and, you know, take pride in it.
And I'll put my hand up, and we'll be the first people to say, Janie, our parents made us and forced us to do yoga and breathing exercises. And we would just look at them like, why the hell are you doing this to us? We just want to be normal.
I know. And I remember coming back from school doing pranayam, watching Ramdevji on the TV with our friends around. Extremely embarrassing at the time, but you know, so thankful looking back now. You never understand at the time, but it does make sense when you get older.
Yeah. And hopefully we can teach this to our children now rather than them being taught by other people. It's our culture, and that's what we should be doing.
Exactly. Okay. So we had quite a few questions. One of the questions that I had was, do you find that we have more of a South Asian kind of admission level? I know it's dependent on area, but do you find that's a thing, or is it quite balanced?
No, so the area that I work in, the only the patients that I see are those with very severe mental illness. So majority of mental health problems are dealt with by the GP. So that's like 70 to 80% of them. And then 20% that are the most severe, those are the ones that see a psychiatrist. And my 3 years of working in both inpatient, so that's mental health hospitals, and an outpatient setting has been that the Asian population isn't kind of proportionately higher. It's at the right proportion that we make up the population. So it's not like we have higher rates.
Okay.
But I think there's so many positives in our community that if we just talked about it more and we sought help earlier, that we could actually kind of combat mental illnesses so well, because it's within our community to work together, the family support, religion, all of those things are protective factors if you have a mental health illness. How
do you think we can break that stigma down or make it a non-taboo subject?
I think stigma comes from an individual basis. So it's about anyone that listens to the talk today, you start having those open conversations and discussions just so that you kind of have an understanding in your family. What is their understanding about mental health? Is it something that only happens to some people? Is it a them and us idea? Or rather, do they have the awareness that everyone needs to check in on their mental health, have open discussions if they're feeling particularly low, or if they're using more alcohol because they're feeling low, if they're getting anxiety, or if your mom's going through menopause and she's having some mood swings. All of these things we should be having open conversations about them. Then that would lead to more conversations in their little friendship circles and their family. So together as a community, we can raise that awareness. But these small little conversations is where it's got to start. We can't just expect a big change like that overnight. It comes from within.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the main questions, like specifically worded questions that we have was, what are the common barriers to accessing mental health services for South Asians?
Okay, so one of the barriers, which I think is not specific to South Asians, but it just could be general public as well, is not knowing where to go for the help. So what I would initially always say is, if you're not sure, if you're feeling a certain way, things aren't going so well, you got some stresses, speak to those people around you, your friends and family. And then that will kind of help you work out whether you've got the support that you need or you need some further help. And at that point, you need to speak to a GP. And then the GP at that point will refer you for psychological therapy, if that's what you want, or they can start you on medication. And this entirely depends on what condition you're presenting with, how severe that condition is. If they believe that the risk is too high, for example, there's risk of self-harm or suicide, or you need more specialist care, or it's a psychotic illness, then you'll be referred to a psychiatrist, and then another team will then step in and look after your care. So I think the main barriers might be lack of understanding of where do you go to. There's also a thing about there might be other explanations about what's going on, and that might delay seeking help. For example, I've seen a lot of, I worked in a specialist psychosis service, and there were some Asian families that thought that the psychotic illness, which for those that don't know, present with someone that starts hearing voices, seeing things that aren't there, and they have very delusional beliefs. So delusion is something like a fixed, illogical, bizarre idea. For example, they might think that they're being watched by cameras, or that they've done something really, really bad, when in reality they haven't. And people might misunderstand that as being possessed or black magic. or they've got a curse put on
or
them.
nazar, as a lot of people
Nazar,
refer.
yeah, exactly. So they might acknowledge that it's bizarre behavior, but they'll have a different understanding of it. And I think that might mean that it delays them seeking help, because they might go to their community leaders, their religious leaders, and try to help that way. I'm in no way saying that religion cannot help with mental health. It's such a protective factor, but there's a time and place for religion, and there's also a time and place for medication. They can both happen at the same time. That's absolutely brilliant, and that helps that person's recovery, but it shouldn't be one or the other.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm just going to catch up on the comments, because we've had a few. So we have South Asian Creative has said, I suppose like everything, it's got lost, but definitely needs to be reintroduced and encouraged. And I think that's referring to the cultural practices like yoga, mindfulness. We've got Narinjna, who is our boy. I'm in my 50s and remember how my intention to integrate and be accepted was more important than anything. I would actively disown our cultural practices. This weighed heavily on my mind.
And I think every person that is a British Asian will kind of feel that way, and I've done that several times. Just to fit in or just be normal. I just want to do the normal thing. If that means don't listen to Indian classical music but listen to pop music, I'll do that. Yeah.
Or just to not stand out for any reason, kind of just be a mold and just carry on and, you know, keep going. And then South Asian Creative said, it's still a huge taboo subject in the South Asian community. Definitely each faith place needs to address and support people from the community, which is quite big, isn't it? Rather than just referring and say we can help, but maybe kind of show you a way to get through to the services.
And if you have a particular interest in mental health, because this isn't like I've decided to go into it, so I've become an expert at diagnosing and treating and looking after in a very specialist area. But to know about mental health illnesses is the same as reading up about diabetes. So educate yourself, read about it on the internet. The information is widely available, and then approach those faith leaders and learn to educate them as well, and set up signposting so that you can help people within your community get the right support that they need.
Yeah, I think it's building that bridge between like maybe the younger generation who might be British born and then the older generation who might have migrated here so many years ago. So one of the other questions we had was, how do we support someone who has mental health difficulties, or you might suspect they might do?
Okay, so the first thing is having a conversation with them. They might shut you down several times before you can get through to them, but just even like dropping them a text or speaking to them, just showing them that you're there, and then trying to work out if talking to them is the only support that they need. I think it's quite hard for someone to take that burden on taking on the responsibility of someone else's mental health. I always make comparisons with physical health. So if someone came to you and they said, I'm getting this really bad headache, I don't know what to do about it. So that's them talking to you about a problem. Now you could give them some options. You could say, oh, have you tried a paracetamol? Have you tried sleeping it off? Have you eaten on regular times? You can give that advice, but there's going to be a point where you should also tell them, well, actually, I think this has been going on for a while. I think you should see a GP and see if there's anything else going on. And I think in that same way, that's how you should be looking at mental health problems as well. There's only so much someone can help themselves and other people can support them. And even if it's just to check in with a GP, sometimes GP will say simple things like, okay, let's try these different lifestyle things, and then I'll see you back in 4 weeks and let's see if that's made a difference. And by that time, you might have got over that period of low mood or anxiety, and you can just carry on with your life.
I remember I went once. This was like a long time back when I had a really stressful job and I hated it. And I was signed off sick from work due to that. And I was doing yoga at home, etc. And I went to the doctor to get my sick note. And she was like, you know, I just want to make sure you're all right. How about you start doing some yoga? And I thought that was a really interesting prescription, because, you know, I wasn't looking for any tablets or anything. I just wanted a sick note so that I could get a bit more extra time to rest up and really figure out what I wanted. And I said to her, I can't get to my class because of this, this, this. And she was like, just do it at home. And it is as easy as kind of just changing your mindset and just trying something new. And you don't always have to go outside the house, to do that. Because obviously now with the pandemic, I know a lot of people are worried about going back to gyms and, so what about coping strategies for anxiety? Because I know so many people during lockdown have, have faced that, going back to work or not being at work or being away from their families. What would you say?
So anxiety is again quite a broad word, and there's lots of different anxiety or disorders. It might be against a specific thing. You might have generalized anxiety where you're always on edge, your heart is always racing. You might have panic attacks within that. So it just depends which where you are on that spectrum of anxiety. One of the best things to do is deep breathing exercises. Again, we're going back to the yoga. So right now, all of that is going to really help. The other thing is mindfulness, because this is going to make you very much in tune with your body. And I found that I've had some anxiety as well. When I used to work in an acute hospital, there was a few instances where I had some really difficult situations. And after that, even walking into the hospital just filled me with absolute dread and anxiety. Yeah. It wasn't like I could just turn around and go back to my bed. That just wasn't an option. But what I couldn't do is do my job to its potential, being so anxious. And that's when I first started doing mindfulness. And I found that so good, because I felt myself slowly getting anxious before it got to the point where it was crippling anxiety. And that, I'll be honest, I don't do mindfulness all the time. I'm still trying to practice getting it into a regular routine. But I do find that when I'm getting a little bit anxious, I'm getting some sleepless nights, I go back into that mindfulness practice, and it really helps to just reset everything and become more in tune with my body.
Yeah, that's really good tips. Do you have any apps that might work or that you've been using?
So Headspace I found really, really useful. It's one that they've got some free exercises on there, so I'd give that a go. I think it's a month's trial. And then if you're able to go with it, pay for it, download it. It's really, really worth it. But you can also just do mindfulness. Like, you can just click in mindfulness YouTube and you can just follow some exercises there. Really, really simple.
Can you quickly run through like how you can do mindfulness? Like, say if I was just going to the park for a walk on my own.
Yeah, so it's really, really simple. So what it means is that you have to be in the present moment. And the best way to do that is usually when we're doing things. So for example, when I'm in the shower, I'm planning my day ahead, which is really bad, because
I do that.
What that makes me do is become anxious about something that hasn't really happened, or I'm thinking, oh no, I forgot about that yesterday, I need to catch up with that, or I'm thinking in the past. So I'm not in the present moment at all. And that fills my head with lots of worries. Instead, what I should be doing, so let's go back to your park example, so it's not so explicit.
Or do a shower one, I don't mind.
Oh, no, we'll do park, we'll stick to park. Okay. Fully clothed. So in the park, what you're doing is I'd start with the bottom. So you're feeling the ground beneath your feet. And with each step, you're thinking about the pressure that it's putting on your feet, how your footwear feels around your foot. Is it tight? Is it loose? What can you hear? Can you hear some crunching of some leaves? Can you hear the birds? And what can you see? What do the colors look like? Are they bright? Are they dull? Where is the sun shining? What can you smell? Is it a fresh smell, or can you smell pollution? And then concentrate on your breathing. So just concentrate on your deep breathing in and out. And by doing all of this, your mind may wander, because your mind is not used to being still. But every time it does, you got to bring it back to your senses and think again what you're doing in that present moment. And when you're doing that, it will just make your life so much more fuller, and you don't have that time for living in the past or worrying about the future.
Okay, so just be present is the thing, right? I'm going to read some more comments before going to the next bit. We're steaming through our notes that we made, Devika. It's going very, very quickly. So South Asian Creative, going back to talking about religious leaders, she said suggestion would be to have ambassadors within each community, and that's a really good idea. Maybe people should, if you are within a community, or you attend a temple or a gurdwara, or any place of worship, and you feel like you want to read up, like you said, then maybe they should be going and talking to people that have a bit of authority, right?
Yes, definitely.
And then Niranjana says, religious leaders make a lot of money from recommending ritualistic practices to treat what is essentially mental health flags being raised, which is a shame. but
Yeah.
hopefully it'll just die out with time, right? Fit Leicester, we have come a long way. My mum suffered when I was younger. It was a huge taboo, and a lack of knowledge coupled with the cultural taboo meant she didn't get to lead a normal life. I think maybe just talking about or typing that to, you know, an audience that don't know you is a big thing in itself, isn't it? To be able to talk about that. So that's great.
And that's the nature of serious mental illness. And I make comparisons of mental health with physical health, but I do it with caution. For example, I've read an article recently which said it didn't do it justice, because if you're comparing a psychotic episode to a broken leg, that is just what people are trying to do is make it more accessible, but you're doing it injustice.
Yeah.
When I think about a mental illness, it's more like a cancer,
yeah.
a one that keeps coming back, and then you need treatment to cure it, and you don't know, you're living on the edge because you don't know when it's going to come back. And from the point you have a diagnosis of it, it is the main thing that rules your life.
Yeah.
Okay. Now imagine if when you had that cancer, everyone around you knew you were getting unwell, but you didn't.
Yeah.
And that's what happens in a psychotic illness. You lose something called insight, which means that you have awareness that you're unwell. So, for example, if I suffered with a psychotic illness, what would happen is, Jenny, you would know that something's not right with you, but I would have such delusional beliefs. I would say, for example, I'll give you an example of what I might present with. I'll say, no, Janie, God is sending me a message. I'm here to do this work. So I'm not allowed to sleep. I'm not allowed to eat. And I have to do this for 100 days, or otherwise the world is going to end. And that would be my delusional belief. And no matter what you told me, you might say, you need to take medication to make this better. I'll say, I don't need medication because God has given me this message and has told me I'm not allowed to eat or drink.
So at that point, then would I, as your caregiver or, you know, sibling, whatever, ring the GP, or would I ring 999? Which one would it be?
So you could, it depends if my life is at serious risk. Because my narrative might change. It might say, Janie, everyone's life is at risk now. And if I don't kill this dog, or if I don't hurt myself really badly, then you will all die. So I need to do this to protect you. Yeah. If I say that, then you call 999. If I'm saying something that's bizarre, but there is no harm to me or anyone around me, then that's when you can say, okay, we need to get an urgent appointment with the GP tomorrow. And that's what we do. Because after you go to the GP, what happens is within 7 days, you see a specialist in a psychosis service, and they start you on medication as soon as possible. And that illness can start getting better over a matter of a week or 2 weeks. But that's a very simplified version of a very complex illness. And like I said, that's just the beginning. That psychotic disorder can keep coming back over and over again for the duration of that person's life. Even if they take medication, there's likelihood that they won't, because to be honest, when we're given antibiotics from a GP, who finishes the whole course once they start feeling better after 3 days?
Exactly, yeah.
So if you were told you had to take medication lifelong or for 2 or 3 years and you were feeling well, do you think you would take medication?
Exactly. You just can't.
It's a very complex illness, and if you lose the kind of cognitive power to understand you're unwell, it makes it even more complex.
Okay. So Fit Leicester, physical and mental health are closely related. It's through exercise I personally cope with the stresses of life, and particularly during lockdown, doing online sessions has been a lifeline for many women. And then Sabrina's skincare. As a teacher, we have lots of staff who suffer with anxiety. Headspace has really helped make a difference for them, and Go Noodle for the children, which has a range of children's mindfulness meditations. And then we have Tina. Feel like it's so important to have info out there and to be putting mental health more in a public eye, because it then allows people to acknowledge they may be struggling.
Yeah, so education is key, and you should be reading up about it, and you should be educating others about it. Any opportunity you have, so you can just get that conversation going. Just a little bit to add to Sabrina's point about teachers. So mental health is in the workplace is something that's catching momentum now. So I'd also urge anyone that has even the interest in mental health and want to make a change, to start talking to your workplaces and saying, what are we doing for our mental well-being? How are we making sure that our workplace enables us to stay mentally well, and make sure that they are being held accountable for that?
We'll just do one more question from Disha. Any advice or coping strategies whilst living lockdown life in an Indian multi-generational family? I suffer from depression and I'm finding the present situation suffocating, especially when the others don't.
Disha, thank you so much for that, because you've just opened up to other people, and that you doing that just helps to reduce the stigma, because it's saying, I'm telling you what I'm suffering with, and that's okay. So thank you so much for that. And I think this makes it harder for us. It's really good that we have a sense of community and close-knit families. But what we need to do is take the positives from that, so the support that they can provide, but make sure we don't forget about the negatives it could come with as well. I think the best thing is that it's going to be hard, but you have to try to make your family understand what depression is, because a lot of the time people might think, oh, it's just you being lazy, or you're just being sad, you need to snap out of it. But they need to understand what it really means to be depressed. And a person that is depressed doesn't have appetite, can't sleep, they feel anxious, irritable, they might snap at you very quickly, they lose interest in all their hobbies, their concentration is poor, their memory is poor. So it's not just sad. When I diagnose someone with depression, I'm looking at all of these different things. So maybe being able to have that conversation with them, and trying to make them understand that depression isn't just a bit of low mood, it's sustained low mood for a long time, then they might be able to understand where you're coming from. Because again, their ignorance comes from a place of lack of understanding, and because no one's ever told them about it or made them considerate about it. Yeah, understand depression and just out of my behavior down to mood, which is what Disha's just said.
Yeah. Okay, so that kind of brings us on to like let's talk a little bit more about this more serious side of illnesses. So we've spoken about like things that maybe all of us may encounter at some point, but let's talk about things like schizophrenia, and you know, what is it like within the South Asian community, and should we be talking about them more, do you think?
Yeah, so I think this is something that the population as a whole and the nation as a whole is not doing so well. There is so much stuff about mental health advocates, and this is all really good work. I'm not putting down any of that work. But when we're talking about mental health awareness, we're missing out. Schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, personality disorders, all of these things are being forgotten. And the reason might be, okay, maybe depression and anxiety is a little bit more easier to understand, but also depression and anxiety is more palatable, whereas schizophrenia, like I've described it, is not palatable. You think about an illness like cancer that is so devastating, and you think the amount of visitors, the amount of research and funding that goes into cancer care. If you looked at the equivalent in schizophrenia, that is just not happening. Not in the current services. There isn't as much help that there needs to be. There isn't enough research going in because there isn't the funding, and there isn't that much publicity about it, because people, they don't find it, they find it uncomfortable, or they might think that it makes someone dangerous. Well, if you had a belief that you were being watched all day and MI5 were after you, yes, maybe you'll walk around in a way that makes you look suspicious, or you might be sleeping with a knife under your pillow because that's out of protection. And that is the reason why, unfortunately, people with schizophrenia have got the label of being dangerous. And there has been some incidents that have led to people getting hurt by a psychotic patient. But if you look at the times where they have been vulnerable, or they have been had violent attacks towards them, that is far greater than the violent attacks that they have done on others.
You know, when you listen to it, as someone who may not know someone who's had a mental illness or been diagnosed, some of it can sound really far-fetched, but it's so real, isn't it? And I think that's what we forget as a community, that it's a very real thing, and it's something that we can help each other get out of, but by not talking about it, we're not doing that.
Yeah, definitely. And just to kind of touch on the positives of our community, and that if we did that little bit more to seek help and educate each other and reduce this taboo that we've created, although it was never there at the start of our culture, how good we could be at supporting each other. So I like to look at research and then present that rather than just kind of giving you anecdotal stuff as well that I've experienced. But there was a research study done looking at the outcomes of patients with schizophrenia, and it looked at a clinic in India and a clinic in Canada. Now, India has much less money spent on mental illnesses overall. They have less psychiatrists per 100,000 people in their country. However, the outcomes were far better for the patients in India as opposed to Canada, which is like a economy that is thriving. They've got really good mental health care, specialized mental health care. But why is that? Why has that difference come about? And the difference has come about because of family support. And I see so many patients that are either homeless or they live in supported accommodation, and because they don't have family to go back to, they might have had family at the beginning of their illness, or it could have been a breakdown of their families that led them to becoming unwell. But what we have is a really strong knit community. Now we need to use that sense of community and be able to support each other through mental illness rather than using it as a barrier, because of the fear of, oh, if I tell them that my son's got schizophrenia, then everyone's going to boycott me, or no one will get married into our family. But it shouldn't be like that, because we are almost there. We have a very strong sense of community. We have religion, we have family support. So the people in our community could do even better from mental health outcomes. The potential is there, but we just need to kind of embrace that we have physical and mental health, and they both need to be looked after, and we need to talk about it.
So what one of the questions was, what do you think South Asians believe is happening when someone is psychotic?
Yeah, so one of the most common things, so I touched on this a little bit, is that it is possession, because it is the things that when you see someone in a psychotic state, it is so bizarre and unusual. The only thing that a person would think, if they've not had any experience of psychosis, is this is got to be some kind of possession, something supernatural. Now, I'm not sure if there was a really good documentary on, I think it was BBC One, with David Harewood on it, and he's an actor who's had a psychotic episode. And after that was played, we had an influx of referrals to our psychosis service. And that wasn't just from kind of South Asian community, it was just all around. We had an increase in referrals. The reason was because these people were at home and they had no idea why their relative was acting in that way all of a sudden. And they had kind of tried to make sense of it all, so embarrassed about it, they hadn't really sought any help for it. And then they realized, oh God, all these symptoms match my relative. This is a psychotic illness. We've got a name for it. Let's go to the GP. So it just shows that education goes really far. So if one thing you do is, after this talk, go and look at some videos explaining what psychotic illnesses are, what bipolar disorder is. Because again, let me just quickly touch on that. That word is used far too often out of context. And again, I'm not blaming people for it, because we haven't been taught this. And I really think that mental health should be taught in our school education and curriculum. So any teachers out there, make sure you're just pushing that in as your kind of extracurricular stuff. But like when people just say, oh, I'm so bipolar today, that isn't even something to be joked about, because having bipolar is such a serious condition where you have lows, and you don't have a day of low, you have months of low, and feeling so low that there's such a high risk of suicide when that person is in that low, and there's such a high risk. And then they have highs which last for weeks, and that could mean someone not having any sleep for a week, not eating because they've got so much energy, talking at 100 miles per hour, their thoughts are racing, and they're unable to concentrate on one task. They might start believing that they have supernatural powers, because in that state they become manic and very happy, but not in a good sense. I've had patients that think that they can fly, so then they've jumped off a building because that's what their mental illness is telling them. So bipolar isn't a word. Yes, it gets used too frequent, but there's no meaning or understanding behind that word. So read about mental illness. It's not hard to understand at all when it's written out. Watch some videos and start having these conversations with your family. So you can, like, your dinner table conversation could be, well, I watched a talk yesterday and they're talking about schizophrenia. Do you even know what that is? Because I did that talk. I did some talks in schools because I think it's really important to raise awareness about mental illness. And it was to a year 7 group. And the questions they were asking were absolutely brilliant. But the answers they gave, I realized that their answers that they gave about what they thought was schizophrenia or bipolar disorder weren't going to change, because no point in their curriculum or education or in their life, unless they had that illness, would they come to know what bipolar disorder or schizophrenia is.
Right.
Yeah. So our limit of what we know comes only if we try to seek out that knowledge about mental illness. So seek it out, because you will only hear the words depression and anxiety. And even then, you might only think that depression, like Disha correctly said, is just to do with low mood, when it's not. It's much bigger than that.
It's quite loosely used words, isn't it?
Yeah, it is like, oh, I'm feeling so depressed today. No, you're not. Depression is very different. And if you're feeling low or sad, let's talk about that, rather than you just saying it's a state of your mood, because it's not. It's very serious.
One of the questions that we had come in, we've spoken about, well, we've touched on depression, because I'm sure it's like such a massive, vast subject and lots of different types. But someone asked about postnatal depression. Any advice or how it's deemed within our community?
Yeah. I think, again, we need to go back to our culture. I feel like the saying, it takes a village to raise a child, definitely comes from kind of South Asia culture. And we need to remember that. I think there's like this new understanding that, oh, mum, it's either one or the other way. Either mum gets lots of visitors, but the visitors want tea and coffee and a lunch, and they want to play with baby while baby's smiling, but then once baby's crying, give back to mom. That's not the kind of village a mom needs. A mom needs someone that will come, take baby while mom can have a rest, clean the house up, leave some food, or even just leave some food at the door, say food's outside, you can heat it up. That's the kind of help that women need. And you need to remember all the emotions that a woman's going through. So when you see her, don't expect to be happy and smiling, because she's done sleepless nights. What she needs is your support. Maybe she just needs to have a chat. Maybe she doesn't even want to chat. She just wants to be silent. But we need to acknowledge how difficult childbirth is and how difficult it is to be a mother. If you are a mother, you need to think about your experiences as a mother and how difficult it was, and don't have these false expectations of what the perfect mom should be like, or the perfect daughter-in-law should be like.
So more conversations.
Definitely, and be supportive, help that mom. I think it's particularly sad when females can't help other females. Like, you've been there and you've done that. Help out your fellow females.
And I think not just talking to females, but talking to your husband about it. If you live within an extended family, try and talk to maybe your father-in-law, or rather than just thinking this is a woman's thing and women understand women, because if the whole household doesn't understand, you're not going to be able to live together and understand each other, isn't it?
I agree. Yeah. So men should be taking that initiative, having those conversations, looking out for your wife. They've been through all that physical trauma. So the most you can do is be there for the emotional side of things.
We're going to do one last bit, which actually we can't talk about it too much, because maybe we'll end up doing another live at another point, and then we've got questions. So guys, if you have any questions, lots of large comments coming in, which is great. We'll read them towards the end. But one of the or two of the questions that we had was pressure of marriage and how that impacts our mental health, and the other question was not feeling good enough after you've been married, or feeling that your in-laws have a certain expectation from you, or maybe your husband does, how to deal with that kind of within our community, and with the anxiety of it, or the mental health kind of impact that it could have.
So I think with the kind of pressure of getting married, I think as times change, women are becoming more independent, and marriage isn't seen as what makes or breaks you, but it's seen as something that will kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? make it better, but it's not a necessity anymore. And I think that again, it's a generational thing, and people will slowly understand. Like, I don't think we're going to be, well, hopefully we won't be looking at friends that aren't married and saying, oh, why aren't you married yet? It's everyone's personal choice at what point they want to get married. And it's fine even if they don't want to get married. I think you're better being an amazing human being and giving everything you can and be single, rather than commit to a marriage which is oppressing and makes you less of a human being or less of the amazing person that you are. Because then that's just really sad on society that they've missed out on you.
Yeah, definitely. I think that pressure comes from the generation above, because possibly that's all they know, isn't it? Their parents would have told them it's time to get married, and you get married because that's how, you know, the rest of your life should go. And so I think, again, it's the change of mindset and maybe trying to explain it to...
And again, having those open conversations, like, because if I had that conversation with my parents would, I think at one point they said, well, we just want you to be settled and that will make us happy. But you can just say, well, the truth is I'm actually quite happy right now, and I know when it will happen in its own time, and it will be great at that time. But if I force it right now, it's not going to make me happy, and in turn that's not going to make you happy.
Yeah. Very quickly, the pressures of marriage, not pressures of marriage, the feeling of I wasn't good enough, or I'm not good enough for my in-laws, or that's how they think, even though they might have not voiced it.
Yeah. So I think, again, this is one of the really difficult parts of our culture, that there can be some tension between mother-in-laws and daughter-in-laws. And I had a real good think about this. And the truth is, you can have in-laws that are absolutely brilliant, but because of the way that culture is, and you've been told as a woman from a young age that, when you get married, they'll be looking at how you're going to be cooking that, or they're going to be judging you on this. You better be good enough because your in-laws might say this, or they say that your mother hasn't taught you well enough. You'll always have those in the background, and that can really affect your self-esteem, your confidence. It can kind of chip away at who you are and your identity. And I think the way to look, I've been thinking about it all day, and like, how do we get away from that? Because it could be a combination of those perceived expectations, but it could also be actual voice expectations. Your mother-in-law may be hounding you down, saying, why don't you do this way? Why don't you do that way? And how do you get about that? And I think the main thing is you need to have respect for yourself, and you need to have respect for your parents, because you need to remember that up until you got married, they made you into the person that you are, whatever person that is, with all those personality traits and that strength and independence. And you have all that amazingness to give to that new family. It's not about making yourself conform or putting yourself into the model daughter-in-law that they had envisaged.
I
think
or they want.
Because that's not what you've spent 25 or 30 years of your life doing, to try to become and fit into a mold. So you need to have your self-respect, and that doesn't mean that if you have self-respect, it doesn't mean you respect your in-laws. No, you need to have that open conversation that, well, this is who I am and this is what I'll be bringing to the family. And the thing is, marriage is about compromise, but along the way, through generations, compromise, which is a two-sided thing, has become a daughter-in-law becoming obedient or subservient, which lessens who a woman is as a human being. You need to remember that that woman is a human being in their own right, and that they were someone else's daughter, and they have so much more to give than be that obedient daughter-in-law that you've had in your mind. They can be a really good daughter-in-law in their own way, and so many more things. And you can both learn from each other. The families can learn from each other. That's the amazing thing we have with our culture. We don't just marry our husband or our wife. We marry the two families. So why don't we make the most of that? Share all the positive things that we do, learn from each other, and embrace that.
So I'm going to stop you there because I think that we could really carry on with that subject for a while. Maybe what we're going to do, guys, is we have about 8 minutes left. So we're going to open up for any questions. We're going to go through the comments. And if you think there was anything else that you'd like Devika to come on and talk about, then, you know, let us know in the comments. So, okay, this is a really good question. Oh, sorry, I'm just going to scroll back a bit. Okay, so what would you do if the individual themselves aren't willing to see that they have an issue? What would you advise to do at that point?
Okay, so again, it depends on what the issue is. I would try to, if they don't want to speak to you further, or they don't want to see the GP, then you can try to send them kind of links about what things they could be doing for themselves, whether it's mindfulness or yoga, because I know this all sounds like very simple stuff, but it's the simple stuff that makes the big difference. For example, if you wanted to lose weight, you're not going to go and get yourself referred for bariatric surgery straight away or get a stomach stapling. What you're going to do is start with your diet and exercise. So again, it's the simple things that will help. So rather than trying to kind of concentrate on, you must go to the GP, why don't you be like, oh, why don't you come to this class, or shall we have coffee after work? Try to do those simple things to get them to open up to you, and then you might get them in a position where they can trust you, and they might then want to think about going to the GP.
We've got mention of the word Gandhi, which in Gujarati means crazy, but obviously it's a way for people not to acknowledge that something's going on. And then we've got a question about, well, question statement, maybe something we can talk about another time, but what about mental illness in the South Asian community as a result of domestic violence or abuse? Does that get talked about?
No, it doesn't. Because again, and I want to talk about community. Unfortunately, community has kind of shifted. It's a great place to socialize and talk about all the great things you've done, the new car you've got, the new job you've got, the new daughter-in-law you've got. But we're not talking about the difficulties we were having and helping each other, support each other. Yeah. So we need to stop using community as a place for gossiping or being ourselves up or showing off, but instead use that support system. We are so lucky that we still, even through immigration, we have managed to maintain that society. So we need to be using it, and using it for the right purposes. Yes, talk about your achievements. That's amazing, because that's how we lift each other up. But also those people that are in really difficult positions like domestic abuse, and it doesn't even have to be domestic abuse. It could be emotional abuse, financial abuse, control, coercion. All of those things are just not on. That cannot be happening in today's society. But we have to show that we're open. So if someone starts talking to you about it, you don't try to shut it down because it's too embarrassing, or you don't want to open Pandora's box. You listen, because that person has taken so much courage to open up to you, and you have to be someone to do about it as well. Otherwise, you're as bad as the abuser. That's what my take would be on that.
And I think even if you don't know what to say, just letting that person just say it is a whole thing in itself, isn't it? And then you can find help from there. Sabrina says it's on the primary curriculum, lots of resources for teaching children. And then Renu is saying, why do GPs always write depression and anxiety on fit notes? Do they need more education and training?
So I think the problem here is GPs have the education and training. They just don't have enough time. They're given 10 minutes per appointment. And I just feel so sorry for them, because I can tell when they've sent me a referral, and they've sent me a really long, lovely referral, and I know that would have taken them sitting 40 minutes with a patient. And that means that they're 4 patients behind. And it's just not fair that GPs, and like I said, they look after majority of all the common mental illnesses like depression and anxiety. They just don't have enough time to kind of have that proper one-to-one connection that I do. I get half an hour with every single patient I see, but at the same time, there's a 6 months waiting list or more for you to ever see a psychiatrist. So it's just a really difficult one. I do really feel sorry for GPs, but they do the best they can. That's the most I can say, really.
Maybe going back to them again, if you know what they haven't said as well. So that you can just book another appointment.
Or that they can signpost you to get some more help. For example, psychologists are great, or some just simple counselling or talking therapy. But again, I think it's very hard. If I had a problem and I had a Caucasian psychologist speaking to me, I'd be like, but you don't know what it's like being an Asian. If I had problems with my in-laws or in my marriage and I talk about it, they'd be like, well, why don't you just do this? Or why don't you just sit down and have a chat? And generally that's not going to be that easy, and they don't understand our social culture and our social norms. So I understand that there's still that barrier of getting help, and psychologists is one of the big things as well.
Sabrina said, even when people are grieving, you can go around and people will expect to make tea and snacks. Maybe that should just be a blanket ban. No snacks, no tea. You come and see the baby, or you come and grieve with us, and please leave after that. Rajiv, who is a GP, and your husband, important to also differentiate between baby blues and postnatal depression, and very important to talk to your GP who can help you navigate your feelings and where to signpost you for help if needed. Thanks, Raj. And then pressure to give birth by a certain age is another one.
Yeah, I'm not even going to open this because it just makes me so angry when women think that it's there. And men don't ever ask this question. It's women asking other women, when are you having a baby? Are you trying for a baby? Well, the truth is, it's none of your business. When I have a baby, you'll see the baby, or you'll see that I'm pregnant. And I think women should just know. It should be like girl code. You don't ask about if someone's having a baby or not. If they want to give you that information, they will tell you. If it's good news, they will tell you. You have no idea what kind of problems. They might have had 6 miscarriages. They might have a miscarriage that morning. What do you know? You might be mental difficulties. So please don't be asking that question. It's not very sensitive.
And then I think the last one is Foy, and she said, amazing and empowered young women like yourselves will empower others. So proud that there are so many young women who are leading by example. Thanks, Foy. I think we get it from all the other women around us, right, that have showed us that sticking together, building each other up is so big for our community as well.
Yeah, I think our parents have let us talk and argue and debate all these things, and that's why we've got to where we are. And we should continue doing that throughout our lives. No one should ever feel, you shouldn't ever feel like you need to make yourself small or change your opinion without having a good old debate about it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Devika. That's been really enlightening. I know 1 hour is really not enough, but if you'd like to see her back on again and we can have another chat, we can talk about maybe a specific type of mental health illness that you know, we can expand on a little bit more, or a topic that, you know, affects our community or doesn't affect our community as well. Anything that you want to talk about, please do. If you want to message Devika, are your DMs open, Devika?
Yeah, it's on public now, so you can send me a message.
Yeah, or her other profile is Dr. Devika Patel, so you can get her on there as well. Thanks so much, guys. If you would like to, feel free to take a screenshot, post to our story. I'll repost because I'm going to try and put this on IGTV, and it'll be really, really important to get other people listening and talking about this taboo subject. Haven't got another talk planned for the month, but keep an eye on my stories. Have a really lovely evening. Lots of love to you all, and look after your mental health, and we'll see you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.